Hello and welcome to Unibet's Inside the Octagon. I'm John Gooden alongside former UFC World Title challenger Dan the Outlaw Hardy. And we're here to preview a massive high-stakes showdown in Stockholm as Sweden's Alexander Gustafsson headlines against Anthony "Rumble" Johnson.
On January 24th, in the UFC-crazed capital of Stockholm, Swedish national hero Alexander the Mauler Gustafsson battles American powerhouse Anthony "Rumble" Johnson for a shot at the UFC light heavyweight title.
Oh my God! Big shot! And again! Oh, he's hurt!
The risk is great. The reward is greatness.
What a fight!
UFC Fight Night.
Light heavyweight champion Jon Jones defended his title for the 8th time earlier this month, and his next challenger will be the winner of Gustafsson versus Johnson. However, elsewhere on the card, Dan, are some marquee matchups.
Yeah, we have Dan Henderson on the card, a veteran of the sport for a long time. He's facing Gegard Mousasi, which is a good opportunity for Mousasi to get a win over someone that is as well established and respected as Dan Henderson. Also, Phil Davis, Ryan Bader is going to be a great wrestling match, and it's nice to see Akira Kurosani back on the card fighting Sam Sicilia.
Absolutely. Well, back to that main event, Gustafsson versus Johnson. Alexander Gustafsson returning from meniscus surgery. And for his style of fighting, Dan, he's going to really have to make sure that that's been repaired and he's good to go. Yeah,
particularly in this fight. I mean, it sounds like he's done all the right things, been to see the right surgeons and taken the time he needs. But he needs to be mobile against Anthony Johnson, and that is part of his fighting style as well. We do see him high on his toes. I mean, he really frustrated the champion Jon Jones with his movement and ability to stuff his takedowns, which was a real surprise for the champion, I think. But as you can see here, you know, light on his feet, constantly moving backwards and forwards. And if he doesn't have this type of game plan against Anthony Johnson, he could potentially be a sitting duck for someone as powerful as him. So, sure. You know, I'm expecting to see Gustafsson fighting on the outside, trying to give his opponent some space so they can walk towards him, and you know, he can use his speed and his range to to work on them as they're walking him down. He's just a very, very mobile fighter. He really doesn't move like a light heavyweight. He's very active, and he's very opportunistic as well. I like Gustafsson based on the fact that he's a good problem solver. Okay. You see him in a fight and you'll see him challenged by someone as unusual as Jon Jones in this situation, and he'll solve the problems as he goes. He'll find ways to catch them and ways to win. This is really nice as well, moving in with fakes, confident with his hands down and using his head movement and his body language to, again there, look, slipping on the inside of that jab. It allows his opponent to step in and close the distance for him so he can start working from the inside. He's very good at just moving his head slightly to the side and working some tighter punches. This was a fantastic performance by him. He really utilised the rear uppercut well, which I'm going to talk about again in a second. And again, look, head movement, very confident in his reaction time and his ability to stay out of danger and to not take any big damage. And a lot of the time, when you find a guy that is as relaxed as Gustafsson, they don't really generally take heavy punches because they allow themselves to ride the punches. Their muscles are relaxed, right. So when they get hit with a good punch, it's just absorbed rather than hitting something that's resistant towards it.
Okay, well, I'm going to go to Twitter now, so thank you very much once again for getting some really great questions over. So, Dan, this one's from Rob Carey. The way Alexander holds his hands loose and low, does it put him at a disadvantage when defending combinations? And we both know that Anthony Johnson doesn't need to put a combination together. He can take you out in one. Yeah,
it's a good question. And there is a risk there, obviously, with being more relaxed and having a more open guard. The reason I like it, though, is because it does allow him to rely on his head movement and get himself out of the way using his footwork instead of just trying to take things on his guard. With a guy like Anthony Johnson, even if you block a punch, I blocked a kick from him, it still knocked me off balance. He's an immensely powerful fighter, and especially at light heavyweight, where he's not concerned so much about the weight cut, he can really invest in those shots. So. Yeah. There is a risk to that. There is a risk to standing with a high guard and taking them on your arms. I like the fact that he's moving and he's agile and his hands are low, and that does allow him to be more fluid with his own striking combinations as well. But as you can see, Anthony Johnson, he's quite stiff, he's quite a rigid fighter, but he makes up for it with just sheer power. I mean, his athletic ability is scary, second to none really in the division. And if you watch this fight here, look how square his feet are. He loves to stand square. He seems to generate his best power in this situation. So if Gustafsson can stay on his toes and stay moving, Anthony Johnson's not going to be in a situation where he can plant his feet and really dig anything of quality at him. I mean, as you can see here, as soon as he plants his feet and starts looking to pick his shots, he's a vicious finisher. This is
keeping him on his feet with uppercuts.
It's scary. I mean, a clean uppercut there would have put him down. And as he's falling down, Anthony Johnson effectively picks him back up again with another punch. It's a scary prospect, you know, to be fighting a guy with that kind of power. But with the fact that Gustafsson is high on his toes and he does move well, it does cause a problem for Anthony Johnson when he does like to plant his feet to punch.
Absolutely. Well, Gustafsson, he is someone who we saw against Jimmy Manuel, uses a variety of strikes. But what do you think out of his arsenal is he going to be able to employ against Johnson?
Well, as we saw with Johnson standing with quite square feet, I like things that are going to come up the centre, and he does use the uppercut really well and the rear knee, as you can see from here. I think that those two techniques are going to be very valuable to him against a fighter like Anthony Johnson. And he clearly picked that punch out in training camp, knowing that there was an opening for it. The uppercut's there, and the knee was the thing that really did a lot of the damage. Going into the Shogun fight, we're going to see the same thing. He starts to look for that uppercut. And even in the Jones fight, you can see that it's like a screw punch off the front arm. Really unorthodox striking, and because he's so relaxed, it's very difficult to predict where he's coming from. Using the uppercut again, use it a few times without really landing it. Even from a nice sneaky trip there, he's clearly looking for that punch, and he knows that it's valuable to him. And I think if we see him in the Anthony Johnson fight, I think he's going to be using it again. So watch this. This is something that's unusual about his uppercut, because the rear uppercut's quite difficult to land, particularly with the range of mixed martial arts, including the kicking range. So as he's stepping in with this, watch the hand. He's going to bring his foot with him. He's actually going to step forward with the uppercut, which we don't see very often. So as he's throwing the uppercut, he's going to bring his back foot forward, which allows him to step through and set up that knee. And this is something else I've picked out as well. Every time he strikes, every time he throws a punching combination, he moves back into the centre of the octagon. He likes space around him. Yeah. And as we were watching with Conor McGregor at the last breakdown, McGregor likes to keep his opponents pressured up. As soon as Alexander Gustafsson's finished his combination, he gives back the centre of the octagon. He likes space to move forward into. Right. So Anthony Johnson is going to spend a lot of time going looking for him in the octagon. I can see that Gustafsson's going to be moving away and creating space. And even if he does back Johnson up with the uppercut and with the rear knee, if he doesn't do the damage that he wants, he's going to back up and allow Anthony Johnson to come back into his space.
And we've seen with the striking there that Gustafsson's, he's like a sniper and very good. He sets things up one after the other very, very well. Anthony Johnson he's got to be really aware with his defence.
He has, but Anthony Johnson, particularly in his fight against Phil Davis, showed a lot of improvements. He seems to have got a good understanding of head movement. He's very good at placing his feet so he stays balanced. There's a lot of small slips out the way, but every time he's slipping, he's not moving himself right out of the fight. He's staying within range, he's slipping just to the side, and he's planting his foot so he's standing square and strong so he can return. Watch this movement here.
It's beautiful.
Fantastic takedown defence, leaves Phil Davis very exposed. And again, something else that we saw in this fight, which we've not really seen from him in the past, is his ability to switch stance. Here, look, into southpaw, then he'll switch back to orthodox. It's a new development in Anthony Johnson's striking game that we've not really seen. And I think this is partly down to the fact that now he's in a weight class that's more suitable for him. He can start, you know, playing about with more of these things in training camp when he's not really focused entirely on cutting weight, which he has been in the past. Yeah. Now he can play about with these techniques, he can invest more in his training camp, he's going to improve quicker, and he's showing these improvements against Phil Davis.
I don't think we can underestimate the importance of having Henry Hooft as well, helping him out with the basics as well as everything else. Now, Alexander Gustafsson versus Phil Davis. It was a blemish on Gustafsson's record. The humble guy that he is, he followed Phil Davis back to Alliance because he thought that his wrestling needed improvement. Fast forward a few years and make of it what we will, they're very different time spaces. Phil Davis versus Anthony Johnson, that was a clear-cut victory for Johnson. Yeah. So the debate of wrestling, how does it play out for you?
Well, the common opponent's always interesting. It's always nice to take a look at that. But there was, quite a distance in time between the two. And the other thing to notice in this, in the first minute or so, Gustafsson's takedown defence was very good against Phil Davis. Yeah. It really shows on how determined he is to improve. I mean, he's got good people at his gym in Sweden to work with for his takedown defence. But to go over to Alliance and to start working with Phil Davis really shows his drive and his determination to improve. And we've seen in fights since then where he starts to employ a takedown game and a takedown defence game, which we've not seen him use a great deal in the past, and which is going to give him confidence on the feet. If he can constantly challenge his opponent and switch it up, level change, and keep putting them on their floor, even if he's not interested, there were a few times he took Shogun down and just stood back up afterwards. And again, worth mentioning, he's the first person to take John Jones down.
Absolutely worth mentioning, yeah.
He's very, very good at pivoting on the spot. He's very good at turning that corner, which we're gonna look at in a second. But again, against John Jones, fantastic takedown defense. And again, moving out, circling away, giving space. The unpredictability of catching feet. They're all things that are going to be on Anthony Johnson's mind going into the fight, all things that are going to make him hesitant stepping forward and allow Gustafsson to really start to pick his punches. Let's just take another look at this. Turning the corner on this was fantastic. Similar to the Jones fight, as soon as he feels like he's got a slight lift on his opponent, he's going to start turning and turning. And that takes their base away. He got a great lift over Jimmy Manuwa just there. And it really shows how his game's developed, especially since training with Phil Davis after that loss.
Put him in a safe place as well when he turned the corner and put himself into side control.
Straight into side control, yeah.
But Anthony Johnson, he's proved to be a pretty strong guy.
Well, yeah, the guy's a beast. I mean, let's just point this out for 1 second. Again, square feet, bent at the waist. This is where Gustafsson's knees and uppercuts are going to come in. But when he does close the range, when he does get his hands on his opponent, the way he can manhandle people, and again, he did the same to Phil Davis, which has got to be on Gustafsson's mind. Gustafsson fought Phil Davis, he felt that strength, he felt that wrestling ability, and then he's trained with him extensively since that fight. So now he goes to watch Anthony Johnson effectively just throwing one of his training partners around.
He made it look so easy.
It was quite scary to see, and people didn't expect this when the fight was announced. Anthony Johnson's got a background in wrestling, but not to the pedigree of Phil Davis. So a lot of the gaps in his wrestling game, which Phil Davis doesn't have, Anthony Johnson was making up for with strength, and he has that in abundance.
Okay, well, as we normally do, let's take a look at the fight metrics for this contest. And we can see that Gustafsson actually is the taller fighter, but gives up a little bit in the reach. And Dan, you've been talking about the striking and the wrestling, and the kind of statistics here really galvanise, I think, a lot of what your analysis has been saying.
Yeah, well, Anthony Johnson, clearly a very, very powerful puncher. Gustafsson, obviously, a very active guy, very light on his toes and very busy in the fight. We've got a high work rate versus a power puncher here. Surprisingly, obviously, that Johnson's got the reach advantage, but Gustafsson still with the height is going to be able to cover more distance moving forward. So the reach advantage is not as important in this fight because obviously the heights are quite different as well.
Okay, final one for you then, Dan. Let's go to Twitter. This is from Petter Johnson. He's our Icelandic UFC commentator. Thanks for getting in touch. The fight will take place at approximately 3:30 in the morning since the main card starts at 2 a.m. Do you think that will affect the fighters? I'm going to steal this one from you, Dan, because I've actually spoken to both the Johnson camp and the Gustafsson camp, and Alexander is currently in San Diego. He's coming over on fight week. He's going to keep himself jet-lagged, and he's going to be okay for that fight time. Anthony Johnson, however, is coming out to Sweden just a little bit earlier, and it's not the time that he's worried about, it's the climate. It's very humid in Florida. It's not so humid in Sweden this time of year.
No.
What do you make of that?
Well, I don't really think it's going to be a factor, to be honest. I think that both fighters are coming in. That's been their whole focus for at least the last 2 months of their life. So everything is geared towards fight time, and it's something they will have taken into account. The fact that they're both preparing in America as well, and the fact that the show is tailored for the American time, is going to help both guys as well. So I don't see it being a huge factor. Obviously, Gustafsson will be more comfortable, but at the same time, I always like going into my opponent's backyard and fighting them there. So, Johnson may pull something from that.
In front of 30,000 fans as well. Number 1 versus number 3. Hell of a fight. So, who will get the next shot at the champion John Jones? Alexander Gustafsson desperately wants a rematch, but will he be rumbled by Johnson, who's on an outstanding 8-fight win streak? You can head over to unibet.com for a comprehensive package of pre-fight and live odds ahead of Gustafsson versus Johnson. Who is your pick to win? What will be the method of victory? Number 1 contender Gustafsson wants to wow his home crowd. Johnson, though, loves a spectacular knockout. As always, there are odds to be found on every round, and it's all brought to you by Unibet. Watch and bet live with Unibet, the official betting partner of the UFC. It's a terrific headliner in Stockholm, Dan, and there are some other big hitters on the billing.
Yeah, well, Dan Henderson, I can't wait for that. I've been a huge fan of Dan Henderson since the Pride days, and to see this guy in the octagon in front of us, we'll be commentating on this fight. I'm so excited. just an immensely powerful character. You know, the right hand is really the only weapon he's needed in a lot of his fights. And as you can see here, clipping Shogun, really, really tight, a real short right hook. Fighting Gegard Mousasi, who for me is quite a spoiler. He's very good at slowing the fight down and making his opponents frustrated, making them hasten their attack a little bit, which does expose them a lot of the time. And Mousasi, a veteran, a lot of experience, will see Dan Henderson as a great opportunity to not only get a good win on his record, but to introduce himself to a lot of fans that aren't really aware of him. Phil Davis, Ryan Bader, I'm excited about this one. This is a contest against two very, very highly skilled wrestlers. It's going to be interesting to see whether they decide to try and compete with the wrestling, or whether it's going to become a kickboxing match, because we have seen good developments from Ryan Bader recently. He's looking a lot more comfortable in the boxing range, and I think that against Phil Davis, he may want to try and frustrate him, keep him at a distance, and try and beat him up as he's stepping in. It'd be a good opportunity for him to really show what he's developing with his boxing skills. But against OSP, obviously, we saw him go back to his bread and butter and his wrestling game. So I don't know how that one's going to play out. Akira Korosani, I'm excited to see him on the card. There was talk about retirement after his last fight, and I was disappointed. I'm a huge fan of this kid. He prepares in New York with Frankie Edgar, and we see a lot of Frankie Edgar's footwork in his movement. And I really feel like he's kind of starting to find his rhythm a little bit. And against Sam Sicilia, it's going to be a good opportunity to fight in front of a huge crowd, in front of his hometown fans, and show that even if this is his last one, just to show what he's capable of. Sam Sicilia has got vicious ground and pound, though. It's going to be a difficult fight to keep on the feet. But if Akira Korosani can keep it on the feet, it's going to be a very tight contest.
Well, if you can't get motivated for that one in front of 30,000 people, I don't know what's going to do it for you. So thanks, Dan. After Stockholm, we look forward to January the 31st and UFC 183, the much anticipated comeback of Anderson the Spider Silva, back in the Octagon against veteran campaigner Nick Diaz. On February the 14th, Wonderboy Stephen Thompson headlines against Brandon Thatch in Broomfield, Colorado. And then the Octagon flies south to Porto Alegre, Brazil for Bigfoot Silva versus Frank Mir. And February concludes with UFC 184 in Los Angeles and two great title fights. Chris Weidman defends his middleweight belt for the 4th time against Vita Belfort. And Ronda Rousey goes head-to-head with #1 challenger Kat Zingano. And reminder that you can get all the pre-fight odds with Unibet, the official betting partner of the UFC. And Dan and I will be back to preview Silva against Diaz. Can't wait to get into that one. Don't forget that you can tweet us at Unibet using the hashtag Inside the Octagon, and we'll bat them over to Dan for some analysis. Enjoy Stockholm, thanks for your company, and we'll see you next week.
Coming live from Stockholm, Sweden!
The atmosphere is unbelievable.
Every single seat was sold and not one of them is being used right now.
It's indeed the big one.
There's not a lot of guys that can handle that onslaught.
You heard it, Alexander Gustafsson wants his shot.
There is no way that guy will quit.
Alexander Gustafsson! Wow, another finish.
It is all over. Rumble is a machine right now. A terrifying force. There's no other way to describe it.